We alluded to him enough in yesterday's video, but finally it looked as though Manchester United had their man when they hired Ron Atkinson. They were back winning silverware again, but could it really be deemed that much of a success? The name on people's lips in the summer of 1981 wasn't Ron Atkinson but Lawrie McMenemy. After all, Manchester United supporters had had enough experience of the manager when his Southampton side defeated United at Wembley 5 years prior in one of the biggest FA Cup final shocks of all time. Since then, he had gotten the Saints promoted and they were marching in on being a top-class football club. This was further emphasised by the fact that they had comfortably outperformed United in the league the prior season, finishing 2 points and 2 places ahead of the Red Devils. Unfortunately for United, McMenemy was settled in Hampshire and believed he still owed his current club something, as they had a European campaign ahead of them in the UEFA Cup. Therefore, he remained at the Dell and United would have to source their manager from elsewhere. Another young manager pulling up trees in the early 1980s was Bobby Robson, and another man who had fine experience in embarrassing Manchester United. Case in point was a 6-0 thrashing of Dave Sexton's Reds in the title running in 1980. Ipswich were already recent FA Cup winners but had their season in the sun in 1980-81, when a treble charge was only snuffed out by Aston Villa in the league and Manchester City in the FA Cup semi-final. Nonetheless, it was still a wholly successful era for Robson and Ipswich as they won the UEFA Cup. United alternatively hadn't even troubled European success since the days of Sir Matt Busby in the late 60s. That being said, Bobby Robson was never going to leave a settled Ipswich Town job, especially with the lure of the national team right around the corner. Ron Saunders neither who United scoped out, but it was quickly apparent that a first season in the European Cup for a manager who had just helped lift the league title for Aston Villa was too attractive a proposition. Either way, Saunders wouldn't last much longer at Villa Park, not sticking around to pick up the European Cup the following summer. But he wouldn't be Old Trafford bound, no, that job was handed to Ron Atkinson. As mentioned ad nauseum in our Dave Sexton video, Ron Atkinson simply had Manchester United's number in the previous few years as West Brom manager. The Baggies played brilliant attacking football, were littered with incredible talent and were boinging up the league like nobody's business. Atkinson had already lifted the Baggies up to third in 1979, which was the club's highest position since they narrowly avoided winning the domestic double of 1954. A further fourth place in 81 and a continued presence in Europe, thankfully for United, wasn't enough sway to keep Atkinson in the West Midlands. The first hint that he might just be a little differently inclined to Dave Sexton was his choice of club vehicle. Atkinson would roll in and out of the club in a champagne-coloured Mercedes coupe. The question now was, could Manchester United play champagne football to match? Ron Atkinson had barely parked up in his garish-looking club car before he had his 2 big summer signings earmarked in time for the 1981-82 campaign. Joining him from his former club West Brom were Remy Moses and the man who would become Captain Marvel and the club's most important player for a decade, Brian Robson. For a combined fee of £2 million, it was the biggest splurge in club history and an enormous signal of intent. It was a big victory for Atkinson right out of the blocks and a huge shot across the bows to any perceived power that might have still lingered in the office of Sir Matt Busby. He couldn't believe the £1.5 million British record fee touted for Robson, but it would ultimately prove a bargain in the years to come. The spending wasn't over there, however, as Frank Stapleton quickly followed for close to £1 million in from Arsenal to replace the outgoing Joe Jordan. There, the supermarket sweep was over. The incomings were not, and in perhaps the greatest move performed by Atkinson that summer or throughout his entire tenure, was to bring in Eric Harrison as a youth coach. Made famous by his scouting and development of the class of '92, it was Harrison who had long made his name at the club for nurturing talent such as Mark Hughes, Norman Whiteside and Clayton Blackmore. They would all make their debuts under Atkinson and had all been at the club long before either Atkinson or Harrison arrived at Old Trafford, but were helped to thrive under the new system at the club. Instantly, with the regime change, the club relaxed, and nobody more so than Gary Birtles, who actually rediscovered the art of finding the back of the net. In what was a relatively Lionel Messi-like form at Old Trafford, Birtles netted 11 goals after failing to strike a single league goal in his prior season at the club. Nonetheless, the ruthless Atkinson quickly sold the forward back to Nottingham Forest at the end of the campaign after a return of a goal every 3 games. Once United got out of their winless first 4 fixtures, they looked and felt way more expansive than they had ever done under Dave Sexton. 5 goals were slapped beyond both Wolves and Sunderland before Christmas, and the club even went to Anfield and got the 3 points. But it's all just a matter of perception. United lost just 1 fewer game than in Sexton's final season as manager, scored just 8 more goals, and were even defensively more sound, conceding 29 from 42 matches as opposed to the previous tally of 36. It resulted in their climbing up into the league podium, admittedly far behind both Liverpool and Ipswich Town, but it was an incredible foundation to begin a new era on. It, of course, helped that United hadn't won a cup match that season, or even scored a goal in a domestic cup game, losing all 3 fixtures 1-0 in both legs of a second round League Cup fixture against Tottenham and away at Watford in the 3rd round of the FA Cup. Those fortunes couldn't have been more different in the subsequent season.
He's playing the ball in for Whiteside, and Stapleton against his own club. He's got Whiteside in the middle, he's got Koppel in the middle as well. He's found Koppel, and Koppel has found the net. And here's Koppel in a lot of space. Can it be number 4? There's the answer.
Orbiston making a run forward down the left. Here comes Brian Robson. He's in with a chance. Yes! Orbiston. Oh, Grimes is onside, and so is Whiteside here. Oh, I say! It's amazing! Oh, it's all over. Manchester United are at Wembley for the 2nd time this season.
Arsenal had been dispatched in both semi-final stages of the domestic cups, and with league form being routinely solid throughout, United had gone up another gear in the 1982-83 season. Atkinson improved the squad immeasurably with the signing of the experienced Arnold Muren from Ipswich. His creativity allowed Brian Robson to flourish as he netted 15 goals in 49 matches. Meanwhile, Frank Stapleton, Norman Whiteside and Steve Coppell all chipped in with double figures as well. Whilst United's domestic cup form had been hitherto impeccable up to the key trips to Wembley, the same couldn't be said for their long-awaited return to Europe.
Tiro dal dischetto per il temporaneo pareggio, 26esimo, 1-1. Sono anche queste immagini che non hanno bisogno di molti commenti. Sta di fatto che il Valencia riesce a gol che fugge all'operatore un po'.
Extremely bad luck in the first round of UEFA Cup competition to be drawn a team like Valencia, who had been far more experienced and successful in Europe in recent years in comparison to United. It was Valencia who had defeated Arsenal just over 2 years previous to lift the Cup Winners' Cup. But that quickly paled into insignificance for United as they unthinkably had their first ever League Cup final to contest. They couldn't have been drawn a harder foe in Liverpool, not only for their standing in the English and European game, but for their sheer knack of winning the League Cup at an alarming rate. Whilst United hadn't visited Wembley under the guise of participating in the League Cup final, Liverpool had won the previous 2 editions. The match would go the distance.
Looks for Whiteside. Took it down beautifully, turned away from Hansen. Whiteside! What a fantastic goal! Again, the outlet is the fullback, Kennedy. It's in! Whelan. And again, Whelan scored it! Brilliant goal! As Liverpool have won the Milk Cup competition for the 3rd year running.
A cruel twist of fate and just 15 minutes separated Manchester United from the League Cup trophy. Regardless, Norman Whiteside, scorer on the day, had his heart set on returning to Wembley later on in the season, as proven with crucial goals in the FA Cup. It was he who split the sides in a cagey 5th round tie with Derby County down at the baseball ground, and he who decided things at Villa Park in the semi-final with Arsenal. And this time, United wouldn't feel so hard done by in terms of their opponents. Instead of Liverpool, this time when United travelled down to Wembley, they'd be meeting Brighton.
Outlet now. Crossed in towards Smith. And a goal! And it came back off Jimmy Case for Duxbury Lane, crossed in once more, Whiteside, and Stapleton! Alverston's made a tremendous break through the middle for Wilkins. Oh, a brilliant goal by Ray Wilkins! Here's Grealish, will he try a shot? He's trying there for Stevens!
I told you.
2-2!
Told you.
And as Robinson got the legs, he's got Moran after him, and Robinson still in control! Play for Smith! And saved by Bailey, my word!
Brighton, who had only just been promoted to the top tier of English football for the first time in 1979 and had spent effectively all their top flight life battling relegation. They had finally fulfilled their promise by returning to Division 2, and whilst they wouldn't be back in the top tier of the sport until their most recent promotion to the Premier League in 2017, they had given United an almighty fright at Wembley. Had Gordon Smith scored in the dying minutes of extra time, it would mean yet another trophyless season for United, and all the hard work cultivated by Ron Atkinson thrown out of the window. United would not give them another chance in the replay 5 days later.
Alverston again, low in for Davis, who got a good position. Robson! That's the goal! Turned it in for Whiteside! Muren takes the kick. And the header by Robson finds Stapleton. McQueen made a touch, and it's been followed in! And Manchester United have won the FA Cup with the biggest winning margin for 80 years.
The sky was supposed to be the limit. Unfortunately, not joining United and Atkinson on this journey were the names of Steve Coppell and Alan Davis, no, not that one, whose careers at the top of the sport were prematurely ended by injury. Nonetheless, it appeared business as usual for United on the pitch as they raised their game to match the biggest team of their era, this time beating Liverpool at Wembley in the Charity Shield curtain raiser before a late September win at home against the same club in the league. United's full force going forward was further evidence in their highest goal return under Atkinson yet. Unfortunately, they laboured to far too many draws in the league, and their poorer defensive record of shipping 41 goals sealing their title bid dramatically. In the end, Liverpool predictably proved far strong anyway, as they wrapped up their third title in succession, joining the likes of Herbert Chapman's inspired Huddersfield Town and Arsenal in achieving that feat. United would have to wait a while longer to match that one. For now, the Red Devils had to simply just be content with being entertaining in their own right in the league and reserving themselves for the cup competitions. Taking a backseat this year was surprisingly the FA Cup, as they were stunningly eliminated away to Bournemouth at the first hurdle. Even though they featured in 6 League Cup fixtures, United's campaign in that particular competition wouldn't reach the final as they were put out by Oxford United in a 4th round second replay. No, the cup run that took precedent in their 1983-84 campaign was a European run for the ages, something that United fans had been crying out for. Early triumphs in Czechoslovakia and Bulgaria booked the Reds in for a Cup Winners' Cup quarter-final that was the headline act of the competition against Barcelona. Suffering a 2-0 defeat in the Camp Nou, United were unsettled in advance of the return leg, with news emanating for Turin that Brian Robson was their number one target. With Juventus more than capable of offering the midfielder tenfold the amount of wages he earned at United, and with plenty of money in the bank to thrust under United's nose, their authority wavered ahead of Barcelona's visit to Old Trafford. In the quarter-final second leg, Brian Robson made his intentions perfectly clear.
A goal!
As Vitor played it back carelessly, Urruti cleared with the foot. Wilkins and Urruti in trouble. Robson! Whiteside, Stapleton! 2 goals in 2 minutes!
Inarguably the greatest atmosphere at Old Trafford during Ron Atkinson's time, it probably ranks higher than the silverware that straddles this March night in the Cup Winners' Cup in the minds of supporters who were there. Yes, it was only for a spot in the semi-final of UEFA's tertiary cup competition, but it was Barcelona, and it was a loud, brash indicator of what Manchester United could be. Only for that old, inconsistent United to return in the semi-final against Juventus of all teams. A draw at home wasn't enough, as a side governed by Michel Platini proved just too strong back in Turin, as United suffered through the injuries of both Robson and Muren, as well as the suspension of Ray Wilkins. Only a goal away from progressing to a seemingly winnable final against Porto, United were extremely unlucky on the continent again. Whilst those enormous ties captured the imagination of Manchester United and their supporters, league form understandably suffered. Coming off the back of their momentous home win over Barcelona, United's league form was derailed by a waterlogged pitch at the City Ground. Momentum dead in the water, Ron Atkinson's decision to take the players warm weather training in Mallorca backfired. They wound up winning only 2 of their final 10 matches to finish 4th in a 2-horse race, even behind Southampton and Nottingham Forest. The optimists among the Stretford end would note that United juggled a decent European run with a top 4 finish that was effectively a half-hearted title challenge until the final weeks. That was enough solace to keep the United faithful going throughout the long summer of '84. They'd be back in the thick of it once again, just as soon as they shook the cobwebs of 4 draws to start the season. Of all campaigns, 1984-85 didn't so much epitomise Ron Atkinson's time at Old Trafford, but caricatured it. They'd be both victorious and humiliated in equal violent measure when Newcastle, West Ham and Arsenal were pumped at Old Trafford. Just as sure as those 3 points were totted up, they'd be taken away with chastening trips to Villa Park, losing 3-0, Goodison Park losing 5-0, and to both Roker Park and the City Ground, where 2-goal leads were surrendered to Sunderland and Nottingham Forest respectively for a pair of 3-2 defeats. Those losses caused ructions in the camp, with Gordon McQueen and Gary Bailey having a square go in the dressing room. McQueen knocked Bailey out, which triggered the latter to take up Kung Fu, which benefited nobody really, as his goalkeeping only became more erratic the more the 1980s wore on. Defensively, United were a shambles. Offensively, they now paired off Brian Robson with Mark Hughes in a bit of a dream team. Gordon Strachan from Aberdeen and Jesper Olsen from Ajax only bolstered United going forward, as their attacking numbers were at their highest in the league. Combating that, United's defensive numbers were also at the highest they'd ever been under Ron Atkinson, as the club shipped 47 goals and finished a pretty distant 4th. Then again, everyone was a distant speck on the rear-view mirror of Howard Kendall's Everton, who had run away with the league title months in advance of the season's conclusion. Once again, United felt inclined to finish 4th in a race that they really ought to have finished 2nd in, especially once Liverpool were beaten at Anfield yet again, this time thanks to Frank Stapleton, to close out the month of March 1985. Then they went and beat Liverpool in the Cup semi-final replay at Main Road 2 weeks later. That particular success, however, was sandwiched perfectly between 2 needless defeats on the road at Sheffield Wednesday and at Luton Town, before the ultimate aberration to end the season, a ridiculous 5-1 defeat at Watford 5 days out from United's biggest day of the season. You see, United were due at Wembley once again for the FA Cup final. They faced the runaway league champions Everton, who were hoping to achieve something that their closest rivals Liverpool had never done: win the domestic double. Ron Atkinson and Manchester United had no regards for those particular sentiments.
Scoring opportunity, and we could have a player sent off in the FA Cup final for the first time ever. Striking time in 3 years.
It more than made up for a season that could have been derailed with patchy form, that could have been derailed by a pitiful European exit to Hungarian side Videoton on penalties in the quarter-finals of the UEFA Cup, a season that could have been a massive distraction from the enormous shake-up transpiring behind the scenes. Robert Maxwell had attempted to purchase the club armed with £10 million as Martin Edwards prepared to float the club on the stock exchange. Thankfully for United, Maxwell's bid collapsed at the 11th hour and he stayed Derby County instead. Meanwhile, the Edwards family continued to make a lot of money from the club, and Bobby Charlton was drafted in as a club director. All in all, it set Manchester United up for a head of steam going into the 1985-86 season. 10 wins from 10, Villa, Ipswich, Arsenal, West Ham, Forest, Newcastle, Oxford, West Brom City and Southampton all fell, and United had seemingly never had it so good in the First Division. Luton and Liverpool might have dampened that 100% record, but United remained undefeated until a November the 9th loss at Hillsborough and remained top right through until the end of 1985, despite further wobbles at home to Arsenal and at champions Everton. 1986 looked to be the year that United finally claimed that league title back after almost 20 years of it deserting Old Trafford. Mark Hughes was in stupendous form, netting 10 from his first 15, then with his form taking a nosedive, so too did United's. They surrendered top spot to Liverpool on February the 2nd, losing at Upton Park before being incapable of grabbing that spot back from their Merseyside rivals the following week after a 1-1 draw at Anfield. From then on in, the wheels came off. United won just 5 of their last 14 matches. Mark Hughes managed to find the net just 3 times in the league between October the 26th and April the 16th, as his imminent transfer to Barcelona was made public. A 1-0 defeat at Loftus Road to Queen's Park Rangers effectively put the title beyond United, as the Merseyside machines of Everton and Liverpool, and even the surprise title contenders West Ham United, roared through. After such a crippling loss, Ron Atkinson tendered his resignation to the board. The air had gone out of the club. Atkinson's signings of John Severbeck, Colin Gibson, Peter Davenport and Peter Barnes were making less and less sense. They were due to lose one of their key figures in Mark Hughes, and they'd just traded in another stab at the title for another 4th place finish. If they'd started the campaign with 10 wins and still couldn't do it, when would they win the league? Out of both cups by March, and with European football no longer a possibility thanks to the Hazel disaster, Manchester United rejected Ron Atkinson's resignation. Even though their one-team title surge had turned into a 3-horse race that the club were just onlookers for. It had been a mad ride for Ron Atkinson and Manchester United. It now looked to be nearing its end. Ron Atkinson was exactly what Manchester United needed. He provided a different mode of thinking, a different plan of action, and consequently United's ailing latter part of the 70s was rejuvenated in time for the middle portion of the 80s. They might still have occupied a place underneath the Merseyside shadows thanks to Bob Paisley and Joe Fagan at Liverpool and now Howard Kendall at Everton, but United were beginning to creep out from underneath those crushing shadows. The first piece of silverware since the management of Tommy Docherty was acquired in the form of 2 FA Cups in 3 years. Even though United consistently flaked out on title races to the more domineering sides from across the River Mersey, the club were now firmly established as a team that could go out and compete in Europe as well as back home simultaneously. This was a team in transition, one that Atkinson expertly manoeuvred through. Half of his 83 cup winners against Brighton wouldn't be in the starting lineup for the same success 2 years on against Everton. These were days where United moved quick both on and off the pitch. But this version of United lived fast and died young. By November 1986, Ron Atkinson had run his race as Manchester United manager, despite statistically becoming their most successful manager this side of Sir Matt Busby. Winning just 1 of their first 8 matches to begin the 1986-87 season, mere weeks after tossing in the league the prior campaign, Atkinson had become burned out. He was gone after frittering away another chance at winning domestic silverware with the 4-1 League Cup loss against Southampton. As Atkinson's mantras of team bonding, drinking and entertainment enveloped the squad and the shunning of the so-called pasta preachers, it finally caught up with United. And it just about marked the beginning of the end for United's prolonged spell in the doldrums. This time the club would be steered through into a new management by Bobby Charlton, not his former manager Matt Busby. And Charlton's choice for the next manager of Manchester United came from Govan, and he was just about finished remodelling Aberdeen in his image, and judging by his success that we've covered in these videos, Sir Alex Ferguson effectively did so at Old Trafford as well.